Ladies and gentlemen, it's a Thanksgiving miracle. Joining me here at the Underground Bunker podcast today is none other than Mike Rinder. Mike, thank you so much.
Hey, Tony, it's nice to talk to you. I'm not sure about the miracle part of it, but it's
Well,
it's always good to chat.
a miracle because you're so busy. I mean, it's amazing. I'm so fortunate. The day your book came out, you were in New York,
Right.
and it just the stars aligned and we got to have dinner the day your book came out. I can't believe it. I figured you'd be, have so many things lined up. That was just a happy accident, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. It was also a very enjoyable meal. We always have a good time when we get together, Tony.
Well, we get to gossip about things, and
Yeah,
little did we know then. That was what, September 26th or something like that.
27th. Yep.
27th. Yeah, little did we know what was in store for the two of us over the next
Oh my
month
God.
and a half. I mean, you have been on such an amazing media tour, and I guess the first, let me just say for those few people that may not realize it, Mike Rinder is the former spokesman for the Church of Scientology. He came out in 2007, and then in 2009 began this amazing exposure of Scientology with some other former high ranking officials, and it has now culminated in a book he had published called A Billion Years, and it's taken the world by storm. And you have been on an amazing media tour. And I guess I want to ask you, first of all, I wrote about your book. It's a great book. I want everyone to buy it. And I've already given some details about that. I guess I'm more interested in the meta story here. Tell me about the media tour. What are some of the highlights and some of the funny questions you've been asked?
Oh my God. Okay. Well, I think that the highlight. Let's start with the good, the positive, and then we'll regress to the negative. I think the highlight was talking to Mike Rowe on his podcast simply because he is so well informed on the subject of Scientology, and him and his sidekick Chuck have been friends with Spanky forever. In fact, you know that's that's how that sort of came about. In addition, Mike Rowe happens to have his books published by the same gallery press as my book was, so but that was a thoroughly enjoyable experience talking to him because it's always great to talk to people who have their own perspective on things and don't just come with a list of questions like, well, what do you know about Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes' divorce? Uh, so he was a highlight. Megan Kelly was a highlight simply because she has been so supportive of me and some others who she has had on her show, and is also very, very, very well versed on the subject of Scientology. And the third one that I perhaps found the most um, entertaining and interesting was Patrick Bet David, just because he's such a contrarian. And he made me think about things. And he challenged all sorts of stuff. And he takes the devil's advocate position on almost anything anybody ever says to him. And I found that somewhat refreshing. There's been some other wonderful people that I've talked to. But then there is the routine, well, we see this book is out, we'd like to get you on our podcast or radio show or TV show or whatever, and or interviewed for the New York Post or whatever it is. And those people got a cheat sheet from someone or made one up themselves and just ask the most boringly mundane questions that are answered in the book. That's one of the things that's sort of frustrating is people saying, "Oh yeah, well you've written this book. It's amazing. I loved it." And then they ask, "So when did you get into Scientology?" I'm like, in the first pages of the book, it describes that. Okay, yeah, 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 of course. That stuff is a little frustrating, but the most frustrating of all was the CBS, circle jerk, and that you wrote about on your blog because we talked about it that night, and I was like, CBS now says that they're not going to air this episode that we recorded last week tomorrow, and then eventually they did, and they had Monique Yingling come on, and they sort of bowed to the pressure of Scientology and perhaps Paramount. Obviously, Paramount's the parent corporation of CBS, also of Simon and Schuster, but the parent corporation of CBS. And keeping Paramount afloat over the last 6 months was the revenues from Top Gun 2. So it's not entirely not understandable, but it's sort of sad that there are still media outlets who fear Scientology in this day and age. You of all people have proven that the fear of Scientology is literally a bad memory, not a current state of affairs when it comes to publishing things in the press.
Yeah, they're still good at frightening people, though.
Yeah,
There's no question.
I know, Tony, and that's what's sort of sad because each of these media outlets have seen so many examples over the last 10 or 15, well, I guess since the Tampa Bay Times series, I guess, that nothing has ever happened. Nothing has ever come of any of these endless legal letters and threats that they send out to anybody in the media ever. And that's gone from HBO to Vanity Fair to you to the Aftermath to everything and anything in between. That it's not that they've stopped sending threat letters. It's just that everybody by now should have woken up to the fact that they are merely threats.
Well, I don't have a problem with someone like CBS bringing on Monique Yingling because she's always so ridiculous on camera anyway. And anybody who thinks about it for 2 seconds, why can't Scientology have a Scientologist on camera instead of this DC tax attorney? But did it cut into your time? I guess that's the big question.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the more minutes, like I did an almost 2-hour interview with Jim Axelrod,
Oh wow.
and I knew that it was going to be cut down to 8 to 12 minutes or whatever a segment is on a show like that. It's not
Right.
long, but if you're then cut in half because the other half of the segment is listening to Monique, then it's that. But like, I don't care. It wasn't that I cared so much about what happened. I appreciated the fact that Jim Axelrod actually pushed her and forced her to admit that Scientology actually does have billions of dollars. But I was disappointed that anybody in the major media still falls for their bullshit.
Yeah. It is a shame because I think the last time they actually sued a media corporation was the Washington Post in 1995 over a Richard Leiby story, and that got dismissed just like the Time magazine one did.
Yep,
But they're
that's
still
correct.
they're still scaring people, and it's just a shame that these places fall for it. Um, but on the other hand, wouldn't you say though that I mean part of what you and I and Leah and so many other people have done the last since you came out is try to educate the rest of the media a little bit. Wouldn't you say though that the questions in general are better now than maybe they would have been if you wrote this book when you first came out?
Oh, absolutely, Tony. There is no doubt. The climate in the media and generally in the world with respect to Scientology has shifted dramatically. Can you imagine, Tony, 10 years ago, two political candidates getting into a slugfest about whether they had more shit to talk about Scientology than the other guy?
That's just incredible. And just for those few people who don't know what Mike's talking about, in the middle of all this, while he's got this book on sale, there was a mayoral race in Los Angeles, and Rick Caruso, the former Republican running as a Democrat, accused his opponent, Democrat Karen Bass, of basically being in bed with Scientology by showing footage from 12 years ago when she was at the opening for the Ideal org there, which we had written about a couple years ago. It came up earlier, and it's clear that she made a very bad decision by going and doing that speech. But that she has nothing to do with Scientology today. But Rick Caruso, who was trailing, saw an opportunity, and so he made an attack campaign ad out of this. And so here was this vicious material about Scientology in a campaign ad. And so she then answered by denouncing Scientology as much or more as he did. So you had both candidates for LA mayor trying to outdo each other with how much they've characterized the Church of Scientology as a festering boil on Los Angeles.
Oh yeah, and almost as amusing was the reaction and response from Scientology. Oh my God, the haters and bigots are out. The bigots and haters are out. Oh my God. And Jeff Pomerantz with his they pulled the old warhorse out of retirement to go stand on that overpass in Los Angeles where the anti-Semitic banner was hung after the Kanye fiasco, and he's standing up there saying, "I'm a Jew, I'm a Jewish Scientologist, and this is just like the anti-Semitism." Oh my God, it was crazy, their reaction, crazy.
I guess the strangest result of all that, Sunday night before I flew back to LA, I back to New York. I had dinner with my brother. We went out to watch a little football, and I'm watching this gigantic screen in this sports bar, and there's David Miscavige.
Tony,
And,
can you imagine how much money they have spent keeping
oh,
that thing afloat? The Scientology TV that has absolutely no audience anywhere, and they are paying to keep it on direct TV, on a direct TV channel that nobody ever goes to.
it's incredible what they must spend. And
It Oh my God, the amount of money that is being poured down the toilet on that. And that's not even talking about all the other stuff. My big hobby horse favorite campaign item on Scientology is how much US taxpayer money is being used to subsidize these activities of Scientology that are in violation of public policy. Public policy is a really, really important thing that people need to understand about what a tax exempt organization must maintain. And it's become sort of my go to topic. So now I'm going to bring it up with you because the requirement from the IRS, there are four basic fundamental things that you have to maintain in order to maintain your tax exempt status. And one of them is not be in violation of public policy. And this is a really vague, gray area with respect to how the IRS enforces that regulation, with the exception of one thing, which is based on a US Supreme Court case, Bob Jones University, where they lost their tax exempt status because they were racially discriminating on their entrance policies in order to get into the university. And so the IRS and people in the area of tax law have sort of decided that the only violation of public policy that is really clearly delineated is racial discrimination. And if you're not racially discriminating, then you're not in violation of public policy. Well, it cannot possibly be public policy, i.e., the good of society, to have a tax exempt organization spending money to destroy people, to hire private investigators to destroy the lives of people, to pay for Google ads to, uh, shoot and produce smear campaign videos constantly on people, to, hire lawyers to send threat letters to people. All of this stuff is not normal. It is not what society expects a tax exempt organization should be doing. And so, therefore, it is in violation of public policy. And this is the easy peasy, I say that in air quotes, way for the IRS to review and revoke Scientology's tax exempt status, because there is no doubt that they are doing these things, and there is no doubt that they are spending money, a lot of it, to do these things. And this is the opening that the IRS should be driving their truck through to go collect the cash.
Yeah, I mean, I always tell people there's no lack of evidence that Scientology is in violation of its IRS agreement or that should have its tax exempt status. It's always the will of
Yes.
the regulator is the number one question. When is the IRS going to have enough complaints from the public that they're actually going to do something? And I took it as a good sign that this new administration had decided to beef up the IRS somewhat. I'm hoping that might help. But yeah, and it's so blatant. The money they're spending is just amazing.
Yes, it is crazy, Tony. It is just and I keep repeating over and over, if you are a US taxpayer, you are subsidizing this.
Yep.
But I sort of want to tie it back to what we were talking about before of the LA mayor's race, because ultimately this is going to become a political football for someone. Someone is going to take this up and go, oh, I can gain political points by shouting in Congress or wherever that the IRS needs to do something about this. And as more voices join that chorus, that is what regulators and particularly the IRS responds to. They respond to two things: pressure from Congress, particularly anybody on the House Ways and Means Committee who oversees their budget, and media, i.e., Wall Street Journal and New York Times, pretty much those two. That's what they respond to. And so it is my objective to keep pushing and pushing and seeking out members of Congress and trying to get someone to stand up and say, we need to do something about this. And it is an important thing for the taxpayers of the United States to have this resolved, because we shouldn't be subsidizing these violations of public policy.
Well, the result of that fight in LA was that Karen Bass managed to squeak by Rick Caruso, and she's now going to be the next mayor of Los Angeles. So, she now has an opportunity to do something. She has those connections in Congress. I think you said something um, about this at your Facebook or at your blog about Karen Bass. Can you tell us anything about how her becoming the mayor might actually help?
Well, I can't, I can't go into great detail about it, but I did say on my blog, and it is true, that when 2 years ago, this whole thing first came up. The Daily Caller or someone put some
It was
article
Breitbart. It was Breitbart.
or Breitbart. Yeah, what some conservative media outlet revisited the Karen Bass uh, going to the ribbon cutting of the first or the second or the third reopening of the Ideal Org in Los Angeles. Um, she reached out to me and Leah, and
Mm.
we spoke to her extensively and to her staff. And she asked to get she asked us to help her get educated. And she watched a bunch of the aftermath shows. She talked to us at some length. She asked us a whole lot of questions about things, and even sort of said, what can I do to make up the for having done this? And because she felt very bad about it once she really did understand. You gotta people have to really kind of get what happens in the world of politics and what these politicians are like. And they have 17 or 20 people circulating around them telling them, well, you need to do this today and you need to do that, and this person checks this out and that person checks that out, and they just sort of show up and they get handed a little speech, they do the little speech, they move on to the next thing. They don't really know what they're doing. That's And I'm not saying that as an excuse, because they should, seriously, they should. And she took a lot of shit about the fact that she first came out. Her first reaction was to say, oh, well, I wasn't really aware of things, blah, blah, blah. And then, of course, everybody piled onto her and said, well, there was Time Magazine, there was this, there was 60 Minutes, blah, 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 blah. You should have
Right,
known.
right.
And yes, of course, she should have. But to her credit, she didn't just turn around and do nothing. She turned around and reached out to Leah Remini and Mike Rinder
Oh,
and
that's
asked
great.
us, tell me the real story here. What's going on? And I explained to her how these things are done. And she's like, oh, yeah, well, that's exactly what they told me. We support anti-drug programs. We're education. We're blah, blah. The Scientology aspect, when they're trying to pitch to these politicians or community leaders, is way in the background. It is all about, we're for morals, we clean up Hollywood Boulevard, we do this, all the little PR bullshit that they do. That's what they tell these people they're supporting. In any event, she then, in fact, followed through on a number of things that she said that she could do. And if you just listen to what I said about what we need or what I am pushing, you'll get an idea of where that her assistance was very helpful. And there are some people who are now engaged in this matter, who are in positions to be able to actually do something. And I can't really say anything more about it than that. But I do have hopes that now she becomes the mayor of Los Angeles, that perhaps the cozy relationship between the Los Angeles Police Department and Scientology will be terminated.
Especially after Corey Palka, the revelations about the
Oh,
corruption in the Hollywood division. I mean, this is sort of becoming a perfect storm for Scientology in Los Angeles.
yes, it is, Tony. It is. I mean, they've got 99 problems, and Leah Remini is only one.
Well, and
It's
listen,
it's
we
it's it's raining and pouring and snowing and hailing. It is a lot of stuff happening all at once.
and the thing is, we have been watching Scientology in Los Angeles die for years now. I mean, this is one of the themes that I've been following is the shift from LA to Clearwater as
Yes.
far as the main power in Scientology. So Scientology's been withering on the vine in LA. So for them to come out with this new ad series where they're acting like they're the lifeblood of the city, and you can and see those of us that know that. See, I know where they got all those video clips, and they just cobbled something together really quickly with Miscavige's opening statement from Scientology TV 4 years ago. Plus,
Yep.
they've got like sanitation stuff from the pandemic that they didn't know what to do with 2 years ago that they're now recycling into this video. I mean, it's such a bizarre pastiche, and they're putting that out to say, this we are the major part of LA, when the truth is Scientology is just a shell of what it once was in LA. And it's a much better time for someone like Karen Bass, maybe some new LAPD leadership, to take a hard look at it.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. And I'm hopeful that that will happen. And even if we don't hear about it publicly, I'm hopeful that that will happen because I don't think look, one of the things that Scientology hasn't yet figured out is if you particularly in political life, if you in some way do something to someone, you entice them to participate or trick them into participating in something, or you're not really fully, you don't really explain exactly what it is that's going to happen, and then it blows up, that person becomes an a literally an enemy,
Yeah.
and they never forget. They just never forget. And it's the same thing in the media. You mistreat someone like the absolute classic example of this, from my perspective, is a reporter named Doug France, who worked at the New York Times and was reporting on the IRS case. And Doug France was brought to LA and sat in a room with, I don't know, about 8 lawyers and Marty Rathbun and me and various other people, and like hammered about he was a bigot, he was a hate, the typical Scientology stuff. Well, Doug France was just a a reporter, a good reporter who was doing his job, and he was getting like personally abused over the job that he was doing. Well, Doug France, many, not so many, but some years later, ended up being an editor at the LA Times, and then the editor of the features section, and then I didn't even know where he ended up, like the managing editor of the LA Times or something. And he will never forget that experience. And it
Right.
will color, and it did color his view of Scientology and anything related to Scientology for all time. And anybody who wanted to publish something in the LA Times about Scientology had to be aware of Doug France's history with Scientology, and that influences how that coverage goes. And it's going to be the same thing with Karen Bass. And it is the same thing with a lot of other people who have been hoodwinked or tricked or whatever into supporting Scientology somewhere, and then it is blown up in their face. They don't forget that stuff.
That's right.
And that has generated or built a world of sort of a network of people out there who all maybe don't speak loudly and aren't shouting from the rooftops or doing a daily blog like you do, Tony, or whatever, but the chickens come home to roost. They just do.
Yeah.
And this is what we are seeing in Scientology. Look at Clearwater. You're exactly right. Scientology is trying to consolidate in Clearwater. But now look what happened. They have a referendum, and that referendum overwhelmingly passes to build the exact thing that Miscavige, tried so desperately to prevent being built across the street from the Fort Harrison, a multi-story condo block that is going to have binocular views right into the people swimming in the Fort Harrison swimming pool.
Wow. You make excellent points, Mike. That's exactly right. I think the press has kind of had it with Scientology, but I have to ask you about one press uh, phenomenon that's been going on lately. I've been in Los Angeles for this trial,
Yep.
the Danny Masterson trial, and Scientology's been a big part of that case, in particularly in the way that the women were affected, the victims, alleged victims of Danny Masterson, were affected by Scientology's policies, and that told them that they could not turn in a fellow Scientologist. This
Right.
has been a big part of
Yes.
the case, and it came up again and again. And so you've got these I'm sitting in the back row there with these other reporters from these major outlets. And of course, if I send a request for response from Scientology, they never get back to me. But these guys do get responses. And they
Yep.
will ask, hey, today Jane Doe 1 said that she was told by the Celebrity Center not to go turn in Danny because it's against the policy. And every day, here's Karen Powell from Scientology saying that's not a policy in Scientology. We encourage people to turn in people to law enforcement. And Mike, it's just such a bald-faced lie. It's right there in the ethics book. I mean, you were once in this position. What is Scientology thinking that they can just lie outright to these major media organizations day after day and there's never going to be any consequences for it?
Well, that's what they think, Tony, because that's why they do it. Like it's sort of the Tommy Davis syndrome of, well, there's no such thing as disconnection. Like people don't actually kind of credit the fact that Scientology will blatantly lie. It's like one of these things of dealing with a sociopath or a sociopathic organization. You can't quite get your wits around. They just lie. They just bald face lie. Yes, they will. Seriously, they really will. Yes, they will. And you know, you they have a justification for this. They have, they pass the language in the high crime to say, because it says preventing someone from practicing or standard Scientology or whatever, that excludes this. Yeah, of
Right,
course, it's
right.
all bullshit. Look, I have said a lot of times, because I've been obviously asked about this quite a lot, forget whether forget the language of the high crimes, forget the passing the sentence structure of does this really mean that a Scientologist can never report anybody to law enforcement, blah 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 blah, which is where they try to go. They try to go to the let's break down the sentence and see if it really says this.
Hmm.
But I want to take a step back from that, because the the bigger picture here, Tony, is what does L. Ron Hubbard say about getting into the hands of law enforcement or prosecutors or the court system or judges or whatever? That they're all wogs, that they are corrupt and criminal, that putting anybody in the hands of the wog justice system is a fate almost as bad as being put into the hands of psychiatry. And in fact, psychiatry actually influences and controls all of that. That the only thing that will solve a, the tendencies of a criminal is Scientology. Dianetics and Scientology. That's the only way that you can save someone who has criminal tendencies. So Scientologists believe, and this is true of every single Scientologist on earth, that it is immoral to turn a Scientologist over to law enforcement, because you are condemning them to a terrible fate where they can never be saved from their criminal urges and evil intentions.
By
That
Scientology.
only by Scientology, only within Scientology will that be able to happen.
Right.
So, take the example of Danny Masterson. Scientologists believe that if Danny Masterson is turned over to law enforcement, he will be condemned to eternal hell. This is the worst thing that could possibly happen, because he won't be able to get any auditing. He won't be able to get any sec checking. He won't be able to get any ethics handling. He won't be able to be dealt with by the only real fair justice system, which is contained in the Scientology writings of L. Ron Hubbard. So forget about whether there is a past sentence that said, and that's PARSED, past sentence about whether a Scientologist can report someone to civil authorities or not. Scientologists believe that it's wrong to do it.
Right.
That is Scientology think. And I found it very, very amusing that in response to something I said somewhere, I think it might have been on Nightline or Court TV or someone, Corinne Powell put out a statement saying, well, if there was anything untoward that happened with respect to Danny Masterson and his alleged victims, that was on Mike Rinder's watch.
Oh,
And I'm
oh.
like, oh, well, that's great. So you are actually acknowledging that this was a matter for the Office of Special Affairs? Like, just so you know, Tony, I never heard about any of this when I was in OSA. People think I knew everything about anything, anywhere, all the time, always. I did not, and that's partly a reflection of the Scientology sort of morality, ethnic thing that you don't ever report a flap up the lines. You try and contain it. You try and keep it out of the hands of people who may be more senior to you because you'll get in trouble for having had a flap. So, for whatever reason, I never heard about this at the time. I didn't hear anything about this until I started talking myself to some of those victims.
Mm.
And I did, however, respond and say, well, thank you for realizing or acknowledging that this would have been a matter that was dealt with by OSA. So I will explain to you what the OSA policy and how OSA would handle a situation like this. And it would be A, never report it to anybody outside of Scientology. B, round up every witness and every report and everything that had ever had touched upon this subject, get it all corralled. I even mentioned, we did an episode with Marie Billheimer about her husband who had committed suicide in the Hollywood Inn on
Right.
Hollywood Boulevard. He was in the Sea Org. And her talking about what happened and how Kirsten Catano from OSA showed up in the Hollywood Inn and gathered everybody together and hustled them away so that the police wouldn't be able to talk to them, and told Marie, this is what you can say, and you're not allowed to say this, and you're not allowed to go here, and had complete and utter control over it. And the only reason the police were there is because there was a dead body and they had to call the coroner's office or whoever you have to call. So this is the standard pattern and practice of Scientology. It is to disappear the witnesses, the people who are involved and may have evidence that could incriminate Scientology. Oh, suddenly they're in Denmark or Australia or Mexico. And we saw this happen in the Lisa McPherson case. A bunch of the witnesses in the Lisa McPherson case suddenly had their visas expired and had to go back to Guatemala. So this is normal Scientology practice. And, I think that Judge Almeida has done a great service to the potential appeal issues in this case by trying to limit the Scientology exposure.
Mm-hmm.
But as I told Vinnie Politan on Court TV the other night when he was asking me, well, what do you think's going to happen if he's guilty or not guilty? And I gave him my view of that. And then I said, but let's not forget there's a civil case coming behind this. And even if he is found not guilty in this criminal case, you all remember what happened with O.J. Simpson. Because,
Yeah.
of course, in that same courthouse, O.J. Simpson got found not guilty and then got completely and utterly obliterated in the civil case. And when you have a civil case where you have depositions and discovery, a very different procedure than what happens in a criminal proceeding, The depositions of the witnesses in this case and the people surrounding this case and the discovery that is going to go on is going to be seismic.
Well,
It is.
just the Lisa Marie Presley thing
Oh,
alone.
oh, and we all know she's just one. But yes, that was like when you put that on Twitter to begin with, and then on your blog, I was like, holy shit. Holy shit. This is going to be a bloodbath. So that's coming in the civil case because we know the civil case is going to go forward. They haven't managed to entirely, you know, uh, smash that into the Scientology quote unquote arbitration world. So
Right.
that is going to be fascinating.
It is. Um, yeah, I mean, it's going to take a while, but for now, we have a jury that needs to come to a decision, Mike. I don't
I
know.
know.
You know, I did want to share the one thing that I thought it would have been fun if you'd been in the courtroom with me was, the whole time, all the reporters kept asking me about, do you see any representatives from Scientology here?
Uh,
And I would point every once in a while. This Dylan Millar would come in. He's a colleague of Vicky Podboresky's.
right.
And then there was this one attorney we all kind of suspected was a representative. And then Jeffrey Augustine happened to notice on the guy's phone the name Vicky Podboresky pop up. So we knew. But, and for those who don't know, Vicky Podboresky is this longtime attorney who's worked for Scientology for many years. She was at the preliminary hearing. But for some reason, she kept away from the trial to try to, I guess, disguise the fact that Scientology was keeping an eye on it. But then the day of closing arguments and the first day of deliberations, when there was no longer any reason to disguise it anymore, Vicky Bob came in. She not only came into the courtroom, Mike, she was literally hugging Masterson's.
Oh my God.
And I said, look, there's nothing wrong with Scientologists hugging a Scientology attorney, but it just seemed so bizarre and blatant. And I would love to have seen your reaction if you'd seen that.
Yeah. Well, I would have loved to have been there.
Yes.
I I don't think that there is any doubt that that Danny Masterson and Scientology are one and the same thing when it comes to this case. They have sought to keep their distance, and I think that that's because if he's found guilty, they don't want to be they want to be able to say, "Oh, we didn't have anything to do with this. He's a wayward, couldn't live up to our ethical standards. We threw him out 15 years ago."
Yeah.
All the typical stuff.
Right.
And I I think that when the civil case comes, and obviously Scientology is going to be a much bigger element in the civil case, that we're going to see, oh, the 12 Scientology lawyers showing up and doing all the talking. It was fascinating to watch. I went to the hearing in the Baxter
Yeah, I was
Valeska
gonna I was gonna
case.
ask you your impressions about Judge Barber. There's a labor trafficking case in Florida filed by three former Sea Org officers, including Valeska Paris, that's active right now in Tampa, and both sides asked for oral arguments on these arbitration motions Scientology has filed. So they had a hearing this past week, and you went. And so I've read Mark Bunker's description of the scene, which was kind of wild. But I wanted to ask you your impression. What did you think of this Judge Barber?
I thought that he was a smart, uh, well informed, not fully yet informed about everything, but a good. I think he's just a good judge. This is the first time I've ever seen him. I listened to what he had to say. he was not impressed by a bunch of things and basically said, you're ridiculous, to some of the arguments made by Bill Foreman, who takes these inordinately ridiculous black and white scenarios and just says, like, puts himself in a weird position. The judge gives him a hypothetical about, and Bunker said this about someone being on video with a gun held to their head signing a document, and whether that wasn't whether that would consider to be duress. And he says, no, not in this, not for the purposes of this case, Your Honor. I was like, huh? Seriously? You actually said that? But this is a such a terribly tricky issue for the courts, and in one hand, tricky because of the First Amendment and the law that has been created, that and you hear these Scientology lawyers, oh, well, Your Honor, courts are not allowed to get into this. They're not allowed to pass judgment about our internal procedures and activities. And, that's true. I rail against the conservative federal courts and Supreme Court that have created laws that are so in favor of the religious entities and so lacking in any recognition of the First Amendment rights of the victims. But he has to weigh a lot of things, and also the fact that every judge is always looking to get rid of cases, and a lot of case law about arbitration basically says, look, we think arbitration is a wonderful thing, and we're trying to protect it as much as we can because we don't want cases in front of us. We'd rather have it in front of an arbitration panel because then we don't have to deal with it. And of course, the big thing missing in any of these discussions is there's no such thing as a fucking arbitration in Scientology. It does
That's
not exist.
right.
It is not an arbitration. It is not anything remotely similar to that. And Scientology walks in and says, well, Your Honor, we say that it is, and it's based on the policy of, committee of evidence. And, and you read the committee of evidence policy letter and you go, wait a minute, this isn't anything like an arbitration. And the arbitrators don't even get to decide the outcome. It has to be approved by the IJC, who's a party to the arbitration. Like, how ridiculous. You can't go there. You're not allowed to make determinations about our religious beliefs and practices, and that's what this is. Blah, 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 blah.
Mm-hmm.
The difference here is the argument is that really a contract is unenforceable if it was signed under duress. And, it's pretty interesting to see the argument that Scientology makes, which was effectively, look, these people were doing what they were told. They were obedient Sea Org members. So they got told to sign a contract that they didn't read. That's a part of being a member of a religious order. And you can't second guess us about that. And if they were fearful of what might happen if they didn't sign it, tough. We get to decide. Their choice was to leave. They could always leave freely. I mean, you hear this stuff and it's like, oh my God, please, please shut this up. It's so not true. But that's actually the argument that Bill Foreman was making in front of Judge Barber, saying, look, okay, they say it's duress, that they were going to be thrown in the engine room or they were being kept locked in a room, and Laura Baxter was having to urinate in a wastebasket because she wasn't allowed out of her room. Well, this is really not any different than, a monk being sent to his cell and
Right.
nobody talks to him and blah, 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 blah. I'm like, yeah, well, it is a little different here. These were children who were raised in Scientology, and that's all they ever knew. And I think that some of those points really did get through to him.
Hmm.
But you never know with a judge what they're really thinking. You know, I, on the other hand, he was pretty clear about David Miscavige and the service of David Miscavige. I mean, he was so um sort of like he said, "I've got this big long motion here about serving of David. How do you pronounce his name? How do you pronounce his name?" And none of the Scientology lawyers said. None of them responded. They didn't even want to say his name out loud. I mean,
Wow.
seriously. So so one of the plaintiff's lawyers says Miscavige, and he says, "Okay, Mr. Miscavige, what are we doing here? I've never had anything like this before me. I've never had this before me." And then he says, "My question is, so if we fully brief this motion, because the plaintiff's lawyers are waiting for 3 return of registered mail receipts to come
Yeah.
in
Okay.
before they can have a fully ripe motion to serve through the Secretary of State, or whatever the procedure is." And he says, "Yeah, but once that's happened, are we supposed to have a hearing? Like, if I have a hearing on this, is anybody showing up from the other side?" And the lawyer for RTC says, "Your Honor, I don't. I'm representing RTC. I do not represent Mr. Miscavige." And he says, "I didn't ask you that. I asked you, is anybody going to show up?" And he says, "Well, Your Honor, yes, of course, we'll show up because we're interested in it, but I'm not representing Mr. Miscavige." And he's like, I've never had anything like this. Either you're served or you're not served. He was really, really unhappy, clearly unhappy about this, and that this was consuming his time dealing with this ridiculousness. So I don't think it looks good for Dave with respect to ending up in front of Judge Barber. The question will be, will there be a case in front of Judge Barber, or is he going to punt and say this needs to go to arbitration so it's out of my hands?
Yeah, that's the thing I'm worried about is that I remember how I got my hopes up about Judge Stephen Clyfield in LA
Yep.
because it was kind of a very similar situation where he was asking very good questions about Scientology's arbitration. And one of the things he said was that the Federal Arbitration Act or something made reference to commerce. And he literally asked, "What is Scientology's commerce? What is the business here?"
Yep.
And it was so amazing. And Scientology, and the other thing that you were getting close to there, I wanted to also bring up is that Foreman in that case, and it sounds like Foreman in the hearing you were at, when you put them on the spot, they will come out with pretty amazing statements of how Scientology really feels about its employees and stuff. I mean, they aren't shy about, when they have to, talking about how we can do whatever we want to these people. You can't stop us. You can't look into these things. It doesn't matter if we're harming them. I mean, they will say it if they have to.
Yes.
So and so I remember getting really excited because Clyfield seemed to be really exposing this, and then he came back and said, "No, contract's a contract." And
I know.
so I hate to get my hopes up too high with Barber because he seems to get it, but there's that heavy precedent hanging over him in the same courtroom from the Garcias.
Yep.
And so I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I hope that I have to say that the filings from their Valeska's attorneys. What's the name of the main guy?
Neil Glazer.
Neil Glazer. Bum. These filings are just top notch.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, so well researched and written, and and especially after the experience we've had from some previous attorneys.
Yep.
This has been. It seems to me they're really, Valeska and the Baxters. We're rooting for you, but you got to know you have some great representation,
Oh, they
and
do.
and
These
let's
these guys are really, really good lawyers.
yeah.
I mean, they were the civil lawyers in the Val, the Keith Raniere case.
The Nexium stuff. Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, let me ask you one. Let me go crazy direction.
Yep.
So Marty Rathbun reviewed your book, Mike. He didn't like it very much.
Oh, he did?
Oh, you haven't seen it?
No.
Oh gosh, I think it's the first post at his blog in about a year and a half, or
No
more than
kidding.
a little more than a year, and it's just he's basically saying you're not the big deal you think you are. Which
Oh, that's so funny. I should pull out Marty's post about Mike Rinder. He's a better man than I.
that's right.
That's pretty funny.
No, I know well, it's kind of a sad story, isn't it? I
I
mean,
see Mosey's on some baking show now.
yeah, I haven't said anything about that just because good for her. I don't want people to think that it's a Scientology story at all. I mean, she's
I hear you. I hear you. I was bringing it up just to sort of be like I don't have anything useful to say about Marty. I
yeah,
just don't. Other than I honestly, Tony, I wish him and that family well. I was very sad to hear that Mosey had cancer. I loved her. I still do. I married those two, Tony.
that's right.
They're, they're like I really, really I have nothing bad to say about Monique in any way, shape, or form, and I never will. And I hope that their son is doing well. I hope everything is going fine. And Marty is a subject of sadness to me, not angriness.
Well, that's the thing is he came out and it's just just viciously attacked you and Leah and me and so many other people. Claire Headley. I mean, Claire Headley. And I just the reason why I'm more sad about it than angry is that it was so fun hanging out with that dude. I mean, he and I would spar. I mean, he would get angry at me with some of the way I would write some things, but that was part of the fun of it. He
Yes.
was so fun to talk to and argue with, and Monique was so fun, and she would spar with me too. She didn't like the way I wrote some things, but that was all part of the fun of it. And that's the sad thing for me is not the stupid things he says about me. I don't care, but that we lost this person that was such a fun person to battle with.
Yeah, and also such a great person to have on the team. Like he had information about things and experiences that few other people had then and could talk about them personally and did
Yeah,
constantly.
yeah.
And his experiences with Miscavige and with the lawyers and the lawsuits and the media and et cetera, and he was very, very revealing about a lot of things that nobody had ever heard about in the world of Scientology before. So, yeah, it's sad, but I hope he's doing okay. I really
Yeah,
do.
yeah. Well, that David Miscavige money can go a long way, I guess.
Yep, can.
Well, listen, Mike, I hope you and the family have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and I'd love to get back down there and see you again one of these days.
Oh, I'm sure that'll happen. Or I'll be back in New York again. We'll catch up.
Yeah, we.
This time you're bringing your wife. Next time you're bringing your wife. I haven't seen her for I don't know how long.
And I was just thinking the other day about that first trip I made down there 10 years ago, and
Yep.
and we sat down and I interviewed you and did some on video, and I remember what a panic it caused over at the Tampa Bay Times that I was talking to you.
Yeah.
Oh, enough. Okay, sir, keep going. Great stuff. If you haven't read Mike's book, please pick it up. A Billion Years. Simon and Schuster, right?
Yep.
And it's getting picked up on all these end of the year best books of the year lists now, which is great to see. And
Yeah,
and
it is. It's very gratifying.
and again, the thing that just I found so remarkable about your book was its breadth. I remember I was about 4 chapters in, and I'm just, this is so well written, and so it's such a great story being told. I'm thinking, wait a minute, Mike, you're only up to 1970. How are you going to get to 2022? There's no way. But you do. Somehow you manage to get the whole story in. And I think if anybody wants a great basic education in the history of Scientology and trying to understand this crazy organization, you've just got to pick up Mike's book.
Thank you, Tony.
All right. And thanks a lot for being on the podcast.
Now I will go down in Bunker Town again to witness history, ride the storm, wait to see how reckoning